Welcome back, readers, to Mystery in Rocky Mountain National Park. Today we're reading Chapter 18, Surprises. Guys, we really need to go. Amber stood above the boys looking at her watch. I hate to tell you this, but we kinda lost track of time. Still kneeling on the floorboards, Jake was hunched over the map trying to figure out how they would get to the Twin Owls. It's on the other side of town. Maybe we could bike over there. He felt a tap on his shoulder. Jake, West gestured up to Amber. Her face looked serious, and she was tapping her watch. Tapping her watch. The image immediately reminded Jake of his dad telling them to meet at noon. Keep track of time and don't be late. Jake cringed. What time is it? It's 11:47, Amber winced. Jake snapped up the map and jumped to his feet. Shoot, we've got to go. They ran out of the cabin and waved goodbye to the rangers returning from their inspection of the outbuildings. Thanks, they all yelled. Jake felt like they were perhaps being rude by leaving so abruptly. They got to the bikes, and Wes began turning the dials of the combination. Jake held his forehead and paced. I can't believe this. We've only got one more day here, one chance to get to whatever we need to find at Twin Owls. If we're late, he shook his head. There's no way my parents are going to let us go anywhere tomorrow. He looked down at Wes, who was still working on the combination. What's taking you so long? Wes looked over his shoulder at his cousin. I kinda forgot the combination. Jake gave Wes a blank stare. He wanted to say, Are you kidding me? Can't you remember four numbers? Instead, he turned around and continued pacing. Amber had pulled the map out of Wes's backpack and was trying to figure out how many miles they had left. She exhaled. Right now, it looks like we're going to be about 20 minutes late. Jake's anxiety amped. Wes, could you hurry up? He said through gritted teeth. I'm trying. Jake noticed the distress in his cousin's voice. He took in a couple of deep breaths, then squatted beside him. Sorry, I'm just worried. It's not your fault. Thanks. But could you hurry up? Jake smiled, and Wes elbowed him hard enough to throw him off balance. Jake put out his hand to keep from falling over, and it squished into the gray mud. Ugh! He wiped it off on his pant leg. Got it. Wes unwound the cable from the bikes, coiled it up, and fastened it into the retaining clip on his bike's frame. They jumped on the bikes and began pedaling hard. Wildflowers bloomed at the edges of the forest. With each mile, more snow melt filled the streams that flowed into Fall River. Its waters gushed over rocks and through the ravines alongside the road. Jake felt like they were racing the river to the bottom. The soft, wet dirt of the road soon became more and more saturated by meltwater. Mud sprayed from their tires and splattered their pant legs and jackets. Puddles filled the road. At first they tried to avoid them. Then Amber shot straight through an enormous one, drenching her clothes and sending a spray of water into the air. It cleans off the mud, she yells over her shoulder. The boys followed and were soon drenched from head to toe. They had traveled a few miles when Jake heard a crash in the woods. From his left came the sounds of branches snapping. Then something big and black trudged out of the trees and into the road. All three kids slammed on their brakes, their back tires fishtailing until they came to a stop. A moose calf stood in the middle of their path. They were close enough to see its belly rise and fall as it breathed. The forest echoed with more crashing sounds. Another dark mass lumbered out of the woods and down the gravel berm to stand beside its baby. Without a word, the kids dismounted their bikes and began backing them up. The cow moose looked at them and made a huffing noise. This isn't good. Wes looked to Jake, then to Amber. Mama moose plus baby moose equals super dangerous. What do you mean? Jake asked. They get super protective about their babies, like way more than most animals. What should we do then? Amber asked. Trample us? Wes said. Guys, I really don't want to be moose trampled today. Me either, Amber replied. As they continued their slow backward walk up the muddy road, the mother moose just stood there watching them. She let out a wet snort. I can't believe this, Jake said. We're already late, and now a moose is blocking our path. At least we'll have a good excuse. Wes made a nervous smile and shrugged his shoulders. The baby moose began walking, making its way across the road, but Mama Moose stayed put. She stared at the kids with large brown eyes. Behind her, thick gray clouds had filled the sky. Drops of water began to patter the shoulders of Jake's jacket. Then the calf plunged down the slope toward the creek. Seeing her baby was safe, the giant moose turned and clomped across the dirt road, splashing through a puddle as it went. A moment later, it was out of sight. The kids jumped back on their bikes and pedaled as fast as they could. The road curved away and downhill into clouds of thick fog. With every crank of their pedals, the rain fell in bigger drops. They pedaled faster, but the wind was blowing the rain sideways now, sending blasts of water into their faces. The fog, rain, and thickening mud around their tires conspired to slow them down. Jake stood from his seat and cranked harder, but it didn't seem to make a difference. They shot by a brown sign that read Chasm Falls, and could hear the thundering water from the road, but they didn't stop. As they passed the roaring sound, Jake looked back to see the river press its way through a fracture in the bedrock and launch a torrent of white water into the air. Mud-covered and soaked, they pedaled on. A few minutes later they came to a gate that marked the bottom of Fall River Road. They walked their bikes around it and into a black asphalt road that led into the Indo Valley picnic area. Tall spruce and fir trees caught and softened the falling rain. Mr. Evans' truck was parked in a pullout, and the other dads were sitting on its tailgate. Jake saw his dad's look of relief. Then he pulled back the sleeve of his rain jacket and checked his watch. Jake felt sick to his stomach. "Whoa!" Uncle Brian exclaimed, resting his hands on his hips. "Where did these mud creatures come from?" Jake looked at his friends. Mud was caked on their hair, covered their shirts and pants, and the rain had done little to clean them up. Jake's dad's voice wasn't nearly as lighthearted. "You're 30 minutes late. We were getting really concerned about you guys." "We ran into a moose," Wes tried to explain. "Well, we didn't run into it. That would have been really bad. It just was blocking the road." "There were two of them," Amber added, "and the rain slowed us down, too." Jake tried to read his dad's face. He looked both concerned and relieved. Was he mad? Jake wondered if he should just let the excuses do their work, but this was the second time they had been late. He hadn't held up his side of the bargain, and now he could feel it, his freedom slipping away. "It's my fault," Jake blurted out. "We were exploring the cabin, and I lost track of time. Wes is right, the moose slowed us down, so did the rain, but we could have made it on time if I had been paying attention like I promised." Everyone stayed quiet. Amber and Wes were watching Mr. Evans to see how he would respond, but his face was blank. Jake knew that wasn't a good sign. Mr. Evans gestured toward the truck and broke the silence. "Let's load up the bikes." After loading the bikes, the kids took off their muddy jackets, and Mr. Evans laid a blanket down on the back seat of the truck. All 6 of them squeezed inside, and they made their way back to the campground. The rain had stopped, but the clouds had stayed enveloping Moraine Park Campground in a shroud of mist. The kids had showered, dressed in warm clothes, and were wearing puffy jackets to keep warm. Amber sipped on a mug of hot tea while Jake rubbed his hands together to keep them warm. "They're not going to let us go anywhere tomorrow." Jake shook his head and sighed. Wes had his knees on the picnic table bench and leaned over the map, tracing the roads that would take them to Twin Owls. He finished calculating the miles and looked up at his cousin. "You don't know that for sure." "When my dad gets quiet like that, Wes, that means he's not happy." "Well, he can be upset and still let you go." Wes scribbled something into the notepad. "Are you just going to give up?" "I'm not giving up. I'm just being realistic." "Well, being realistic means that we've still got a chance." Wes kept writing in the notebook. "But we've got zero chance if we don't make a plan and give our parents an itinerary for Twin Owls." "I should have been watching the time." Jake held his head in his hands, then let them drop to his side. Amber sat down beside Wes, cradling the streaming mug of tea in her hands. "Jake, we all lost track of time. The team lost track of time. That's how the team works. We don't let one person take the blame. We all own it together." Amber's eyes told Jake that it was not worth arguing with her. She believed every word she just said. "Done." Wes flicked the pencil into the air and caught it. "I'm going to give the itinerary to my dad. You guys good with that?" Jake and Amber nodded, and Wes walked into the mist to find his dad. They spent the rest of the day playing card games and watching the elk at the edge of the meadows. Later in the afternoon, the clouds receded and the sun warmed the rain-drenched tall grass that covered Moraine Park. Wes and Uncle Brian gathered their fly fishing gear and invited Jake and Amber to join them down at the stream. They taught them how to spot trout along its banks and how to cast a fly. As the sun set, the whole valley turned pink and orange. The elk slowly moved upstream, out of the meadows, and into the aspens to bed down for the night. A hatch of insects hung in the air. While the kids attempted to catch one more trout, Uncle Brian sat down to enjoy the twilight. Jake reeled his line in and sat beside him. Together they watched Amber and Wes, their playful silhouettes in the glint of gold light illuminating their fly line in the sunset. Uncle Brian slapped Jake on the back and hugged him around the shoulders. "Doesn't get much better than this, kid." "It might." Jake looked at his uncle and smiled. "I mean, we've got almost 2 months together in places like this. Who knows? It might get better." Uncle Brian laughed. "Sometimes you remind me of your Grandpa Evans. That's just like something he would have said." Jake gazed at the sunset and soaked in his uncle's words. Something in his spirit brightened. Wes and Amber had stopped fishing and were walking back with their gear, talking and laughing. He couldn't hear their words, but Jake could tell they were happy and absorbed in the moment just as much as he was. "I've got good news for you three." Uncle Brian pulled off his sunglasses. "I talked with the other parents, and we'd like to talk with you kids about your itinerary after dinner." Jake looked at Wes, hoping that he might know more, but Wes just shrugged. "Well, speaking of dinner, I'm going to go help your mom out." Uncle Brian dusted off his jeans and stood up. "Wes, can you help Jake and Amber pack up the gear?" "Sure thing, Dad." Uncle Brian crossed at a shallow spot in the creek, walking across a set of stepping stones. "So you don't know what they decided?" Jake asked Wes. Wes shook his head and gave Jake a blank look. "I've got no idea." After dinner, Mr. Catalina built a fire, and Mr. Evans asked everyone to gather their camp chairs around the fire ring. Jake, Wes, and Amber sat side by side and waited quietly like a group of defendants in court waiting for the jury's verdict. Jake's dad was the first to speak. "When you three were late today, we all got quite worried." Wes bit his lip and nodded. "It's not about being on time. It's about your safety and our ability to trust you. Letting you do things on your own comes with some risks. And our families have talked a lot about it, whether or not you're really old enough to be venturing out alone. We decided you were, and we talked with you guys the other night about how important it was to build trust." Jake sat up in the camp chair and leaned in toward the fire. "This doesn't sound like it's going to turn out very well." Uncle Brian talked next. "You've been late twice." He held up 2 fingers. "We realized that there were some things outside of your control, like the snow that first time, the moose, and the rain today, but that's kind of the point. You've got to plan for things to go sideways, for surprises." Jake's dad held the itinerary in his hands. "When we got your plan for tomorrow, to be honest, we weren't sure what to do." He looked at Jake for a moment. "But as we talked about it, we kept coming back to you." He pointed across the fire at Jake. "And how you took responsibility for arriving late. You could have blamed it on the circumstances, or even made something up, but you told the truth. That tells us we can give you three another chance," Uncle Brian said. "We've officially approved your plan to visit the Twin Owls." Jake felt like he was going to collapse with relief. "Our only request is that you add your bike route to the itinerary so that we know the exact road you'll be taking. And," Jake's dad added, "we want you three to be mindful of cars when you're on the roads. You've got to assume," Jake finished his dad's sentence, "that they can't see you." His dad smiled and nodded, and then it had been something his dad said to him every time he went on a bike ride. Wes was sitting upright with his hand raised high like he was in class. Uncle Brian noticed and responded, "Yes, the gentleman with the wild curly red hair." The itinerary says that we'll be back by 2 p.m. Yeah. Let's change that to 3, just in case there are some surprises." Hearing the word surprises, Jake felt a strange sense of warning pulse through his body. He watched Wes give Amber a high five and couldn't help smiling. But the unsettled feeling stayed. Something about tomorrow felt different, felt dangerous. Join us next time for Chapter 19, Twin Owls.